Gonna get going here. Probably most of you know Al Mytty, but if you don't, he's a great speaker, and he's also head of the World Beyond War for the Central Florida World Beyond War, and active in the Veterans for Peace as well with Larry Gilbert. And we were just talking about how, we can't get 350 billion per year for the next 10 years.
Yeah,
We can't get that, but we can spend, twice that much in 1 year on military spending, and incremental military spending, as if we don't have enough military spending already. So whenever you want to get going, Al, the floor is yours.
Yeah, come on.
All right. Well, should I then share screen and go ahead, Sue?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, there may be a few people that are coming late, but,
What is it? Connect to closed caption.
I don't know.
I don't know how to do that.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get started. This is a presentation on the global war on terror. And as Sue mentioned, I'm the coordinator for our local chapter of World Beyond War, and also associated with the Veterans for Peace and with the Florida Peace and Justice Alliance, and the links to the websites are there on that slide. And as is my email, in case you're not on our email list and you'd like to be, would love to have you join us. We're going to start with a pop quiz. And you can answer these questions, write them down, or you can do whatever you'd like with them or ignore them. But this is about 9/11 and the global war on terror. Okay, question number 1. We remember September 11th as the day when the Taliban from Afghanistan attacked the United States. True or false? Number 2, Saddam Hussein from Iraq was supplying Al-Qaeda with weapons to attack the U.S. True or false? Osama bin Laden was from what country? Approximately how many people died from the 9/11 hijacked planes and crashes into the buildings or the ground? 10,000 or 3,000? Question 5. 7,000 plus U.S. military personnel have died from military operations in the global war on terror. How many have died from suicide? 7,000, 10,000, or 30,000 plus? Question 6. Whom had the Taliban offered to turn over to a third country in October 2001? Number 7. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is a Pakistani Islamist militant held by the United States at Guantanamo Bay under terrorism-related charges. He was named as the principal architect of the 9/11 attacks. How long has he been in U.S. custody without trial? Number 8. The Taliban offered to negotiate a surrender, which was not accepted by the U.S. in what year? Number 9. Saddam Hussein from Iraq offered to leave his country if the U.S. would do what? It's one of those 3. And number 10, the U.S. helped to financially and militarily support the Mujahideen, one faction that became the Taliban. way back in the 1970s, and the US supported Saddam Hussein militarily in Iraq. True or false? And we'll go over the answers at close to the end of the presentation. I want to start though up front by saying that I also need to move something here on my screen. Sorry, bear with me here for just a second. If any of you have relatives who died or were injured on 9/11, or if you have loved ones or family members or friends who died or have been injured or are suffering because of the global war on terror, I am sorry and compassionate for what you are also suffering, and my heart goes out to you. I've got to move something here. There we go. On September 11th, 2001, we were horrified when 19 suicidal militants with hijacked jetliners could attack this country and cause the deaths of 2,977 people. We were under attack. Why, we asked. Why do they hate us? How will we respond? Well, our response came less than a month later on October 7th, 2001. Who did that? October 7th, 2001. This is how our global war on terror began. These are the words of Lieutenant General Chuck Wald, commander of the Combined Air Operations Center in Saudi Arabia. It was his job to coordinate every aspect of the Afghan air war. But apparently the CIA had not gotten that memo. Instead, the CIA launched the first ever combat strike by a drone. The botched Hellfire missile attack by a CIA Predator drone killed others, but the Taliban Supreme Commander, Mullah Mohammed Omar, escaped that day. He died of tuberculosis on 23 April 2013. That's how the global war on terror began. And this is how it ended. Our investigation now concludes that the strike was a tragic mistake. Those are the words of General Kenneth Frank McKenzie, the commander of U.S. Central Command, describing another drone attack that occurred on August 29th, 2021. Our 20-year war in Afghanistan ended with an attack on Zamari Ahmadi, which killed him along with 9 other civilians, 7 of them young children. Zamari Ahmadi had been employed by a California-based humanitarian organization and had applied for a visa to come to the U.S., as had Ahmadi's nephew Nasser, who was also killed in the same attack. And these are pictures of the Zamari Ahmadi family, some of the most recent victims of the U.S. war in Afghanistan. There's another comment on the war. The war in Afghanistan has been a strategic failure. Those are the words of General Mark Milley, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And yet, throughout the war, we listened to the generals. They kept telling us, we're turning the corner. We're training hundreds of thousands of Afghans to carry on this fight. We need more troops. We need fewer troops. Regardless, we need more money. Then when they left the military, they went to high-paying board or executive positions with military contractors or lobbyists. The 8 generals who commanded American forces in Afghanistan between 2008 and 2018 have gone on to serve on more than 20 corporate boards. General Stanley McChrystal has been a board member or advisor for at least 10 companies since 2010. General Joseph Dunford went on to serve on the board of Lockheed Martin. General John Allen is the president of the Brookings Institution, which has received $1.5 million over 3 years from Northrop Grumman, another huge military contractor. And General David Petraeus now sits on the board of KKR, a private equity firm in New York with many investments in the defense industry. The current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, is a retired four-star general. After retiring as CENTCOM commander, Austin joined the board of Raytheon Technologies, a military contractor. As of October 2020, his Raytheon stock holdings were worth roughly $500,000, and his compensation, including stock, totaled $1.4 million. Before Austin, we had James Mattis, who was also a four-star general. After retiring from the military, Mattis worked for FWA Consultants and served on the board of General Dynamics. Between 2013 and 2017, Mattis made more than $900,000 in compensation, including company stock. On August 31st, President Biden said, "Last night in Kabul, the United States ended 20 years of war in Afghanistan, the longest war in American history." But he went on to say, "We will maintain the fight against terrorism in Afghanistan and other countries." This was 5 days after August 26, when a suicide bomb was detonated at the gate of at Kabul's international airport, killing and wounding scores of Afghans and killing 13 U.S. soldiers. After that attack, President Biden said, "To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive, we will not forget, we will hunt you down and make you pay. We will respond with force and precision at our time, at the place we choose, and the moment of our choosing." The next day, on August 27th, the U.S. military carried out a drone strike against what it said was an ISIS-K planner. The U.S. military's claim that it knows of no civilian casualties in the attack is contradicted by reports from the ground. "We saw that rickshaws were burning," one Afghan witness said. "Children and women were wounded, and one man, one boy, and one woman had been killed on the spot." Then on August 29th, U.S. drones struck and killed the Zamari Ahmadi family. Wasn't Vietnam enough of a lesson?
I don't know, it sounds like my video's not working.
Wasn't Vietnam enough of a lesson? But apparently not. The U.S. seems to be addicted to war. This is a political cartoon from the 1950s. That's 60 plus years ago, when President Eisenhower began to warn us about the military-industrial complex. And you can see who gets served. It's war that gets served, and not medicine, not education, not the arts. And as you can see here from the discretionary budget, 50% of that budget goes to the military. That doesn't include the money that we need to spend on veterans to take care of them, who we send to the wars. Doesn't include the money we spend in energy and environment, which includes the atomic weapons. And now 1/4 to 1/3 of all Pentagon contracts in recent years have gone to just 5 major weapons contractors: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman. The weapon makers have spent $2.5 billion on lobbying over the past 2 decades, employing on average over 700 lobbyists per year over the past 5 years, more than 1 lobbyist per member of Congress. And 4 of the past 5 U.S. Secretaries of Defense came from one of those top 5 arms contractors. And over half of the Pentagon spending since fiscal year 2001 went to the private sector. Probably know about this. The U.S. spends more on the military and war than the next highest 10 countries combined. But when you look at that, you see of those next 10 countries, 5 of them are our allies. Eisenhower told us, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hopes of its children. The bloated Pentagon spending is indeed a theft. There's a myth about war, that war is necessary and that it's good for the economy. Well, the research by Drs. Robert Poland and Dr. Heidi Garrett Peltier dispel that myth. The myth is that among other great things that war does, it's good for the economy and it creates jobs. Well, yes, that's true. It does create jobs. But if you spent $1 billion instead of on the military, just gave the money back to taxpayers, you'd create 35% more jobs. If you spend it on clean energy, you'd create 50% more jobs. If you spend it on healthcare, 54% more jobs. If you spend it on education, 138% more jobs than you get by spending that amount on war. From the Institute for Policy Studies, in the 20 years since 9/11, the U.S. response of thoroughly militarizing foreign and domestic policy has cost us over $21 trillion. And what else could we do with that money? Well, the U.S. could fully decarbonize its electric grid for $4.5 trillion. We could create 5 million jobs paying $15 an hour. We could erase all student debt of $1.7 trillion and more. And that would be still less than half of what we spent on militarization. For 3% of U.S. military spending could end starvation on Earth. So it really is a theft from children, like Eisenhower told us. The National Priorities Project has a great tool at their website. You can go there and do a bunch of drill down kinds of things. For military in 2021, taxpayers in the state of Florida are paying $45.37 billion for military. Here's what that $43.4 billion could do. It could provide 84.24 million public housing units. It could provide 1 million jobs. It could hire 680,000 elementary school teachers. It could provide 1.28 million Head Start slots for children. It could provide veterans VA medical care for 4.74 million veterans. It could provide 2.56 million scholarships for university students for 4 years. And yet we insist on spending it on war and military contractors. And we sustain and maintain 800 military installations and bases scattered all around the world. So what does the global war on terror accomplish? This is material from David Swanson at World Beyond War. The wars that have used the war on terror and usually the 2001 authorization on the use of military force as an excuse have included wars in, you can see them there, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Libya, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, Philippines, plus military actions literally all over the world. There have been coups too, such as coups in Afghanistan, Venezuela, Iraq, Haiti, Honduras, Syria, Libya, Bolivia. And now we get to the people who've been killed. The best available estimates of the number of people directly and violently killed by the wars. So not counting those who have frozen to death, starved to death, died of disease after moving elsewhere, committed suicide, etc. Iraq, 2.38 million. Afghanistan and Pakistan, 1.2 million. Libya, Syria, Somalia, Yemen. You can see the deaths in those countries. And to those figures would be added another 0.007 million deaths of US troops, a figure that does not include mercenaries or suicides. So that's close to 6 million people who have died from these global wars on terror. And regarding the myth that war is natural or that war is in our genes, think about the fact that while more than 7,000 military personnel have died from military operations, more than 30,000 have died from suicide. If war were natural and in our genes, would we have so much suicide and so much post-traumatic stress disorder? We hear of PTSD as a result of war, but not PTSD as a result of peace. And here's what war does. Another myth of war is that war is inevitable. War is always the last result. Here's sort of a quiz. Who said this? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the peacemakers for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. Who said this? Hermann Goering, who was the German politician, military leader, and convicted war criminal. The guy who, one of the architects of the Third Reich Nazi police state, the Gestapo, and concentration camps. So the war on terror for 20 plus years was our only option. We had no choice. We had to bomb and fight. We had to cause death and destruction. We could save the world by also helping to destroy it. We could defeat terrorism. We could nation build. We had no choice but to do this for decades. Well, back in 2001, the Taliban offered to turn over bin Laden, but Bush rejected that offer. And Bush rejected another offer by the Taliban to turn over bin Laden. And in 2002, the Taliban was so weak, they were ready to cut a deal, but the United States, out of hubris, didn't want to hear about it. Donald Rumsfeld said, the answer is no. It would not be consistent with what I have said. And the New York Times raised the question again in 2021. Did the war in Afghanistan have to happen? And regarding the war in Iraq, Bush thought that Saddam was prepared to leave. Saddam was prepared to take $1 billion and go into exile before the Iraq war, but we didn't accept that offer, and we didn't encourage it. So now coming back to the quiz, number one, we remember September 11th as the day when the Taliban from Afghanistan attacked the United States. False. Saddam Hussein from Iraq was supplying al-Qaeda with weapons to attack the US. False. Osama bin Laden was from what country? Saudi Arabia. Approximately how many people died from the 9/11 attacks? 3,000. 7,000 US military personnel died from military operations. How many died from suicide? 30,000. Whom had the Taliban offered to turn over to a third country in October 2001? Osama bin Laden. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the Islamist militant, has been held in Guantanamo without trial for 18 years since March 2003. The Taliban offered to negotiate a surrender, which the U.S. refused in what year? 2002. Saddam Hussein from Iraq offered to leave his country if the U.S. would do what? Let him go into exile and take $1 billion. Instead, we chose to spend $880 billion on the war in Iraq. And the U.S. helped to financially and militarily support the Mujahideen, the faction that part of which became the Taliban way back in the 70s, and the U.S. supported Saddam Hussein militarily in Iraq. That is true. Lots of us remember Senator J. William Fulbright, the Democrat from Arkansas. Well, in 1972, when the war in Vietnam was still unfortunately raging, Fulbright said, and I'm going to read the italicized part, the Cold War, instead of having to say how they knew that Vietnam was the Cold Warriors, sorry, instead of having to say how they knew that Vietnam was part of a plan for the communization of the world, so manipulated the terms of public discussion as to be able to demand that the skeptics prove that it was not. If the skeptics could not, then the war must go on. To end it would be recklessly risking the national security. We come to the ultimate illogic. War is the course of prudence and sobriety until the case for peace is proved under impossible rules of evidence or until the enemy surrenders. Rational men cannot deal with each other on this basis. That was in 72. So what could the U.S. do or help to do? And these are not my recommendations, but I agree with them. These are from a book by World Beyond War, a global security system, an alternative to war. There are also recommendations from Andrew Bacevich, who's the president of the Quincy Institute. He's also a West Point graduate and former military officer. So we could work to demilitarize security. So rather than picking sides, honestly broker improved relationships with nations. We could stop arming the world with more weapons. We could work to end weapons of mass destruction. We could stop being the judge, jury, and executioner and assassinating people. We could close the overseas military bases. We could seriously promote reductions or the end to nuclear weaponry for all nations. We could significantly cut the spending for war and the preparation for war. Through diplomacy and negotiation, we could work with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea to reduce tensions. We could stop militarizing space, and we could end the sanctions against other countries. In the area of working towards managing conflict without violence, we could work with other countries and to lead and work with other countries in establishing and reforming institutions for managing international and civil conflict. We could work to reform the UN Charter, the General Assembly, and the Security Council. We could strengthen the International Court of Justice. We could strengthen the International Criminal Court. We could encourage compliance with existing treaties. We could establish truth and reconciliation commissions. We could pay reparations for the victims of war and the damage we have caused. We could support nonviolent intervention, and we could create a nonviolent civilian-based defense force. What else could we do and help to do in creating a culture of peace? Well, we could cultivate peace journalism. We could spread and fund peace education and peace research. We could acknowledge change and accept it and even encourage change. We could use religion as a tool for building peace rather than for justifying war. This is Malika Ahmadi, age 2, who died in that last US drone strike. As Dr. King told us, returning hate for hate multiplies hate. adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence. And toughness multiplies toughness in a descending spiral of destruction. And Kathy Kelly, who's a lifelong activist who's been to Afghanistan multiple times, and by the way, was in Iraq, handing out dates and water to American soldiers when they invaded in 2003 during the shock and awe thing. She said, blood doesn't wash away blood. So who lies, who dies, who pays, and who profits? That's the Code Pink slogan for war. And lastly, I'd like to also promote, I just learned about this a few days ago. It's going on right now, October 1st to October 31st. It's a War on Terror film festival. And it includes movies that you can see, and then there's panel discussions. And the panelists include Edward Snowden, Noam Chomsky, Michael Moore, Rory Kennedy, Glenn Greenwald, Amy Goodman, and lots of others. And they're going to be showing these films throughout the month and then repeating the films. And so you can go to that website, WOT Film Fest, War on Terror, filmfest.com to register for it. And I guess I'll close with this question, what were these questions? What are our priorities and can we change? And thank you very much. I'll stop share now.
Thanks, Al. That was enlightening, scary, for sure, and especially when you think about, how much money the complaints about how much money we're going to spend on infrastructure. It's nothing compared to what we spend on military.
Right.
I mean,
and we always hear this, we got to spend to support the troops. If we don't spend it on defense, we're not supporting the troops. Well, as these data show, it's supporting military contractors. This isn't going to the troops. This isn't going to veterans so that they can get the care that they need. This is going to military contractors.
So anybody who would like to speak, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you.
I was just going to tell you that.
And
Go back and see. Oh, somebody's raising their hand.
I'm raising my hand, Barbara, here. Hardly had the troops started returning from Afghanistan about 3 weeks ago when CNN and MSNBC had George Bush, had Biden on with the new Prime Minister of Israel, whose arch enemy, quote, is Iran. And he asked for Biden to please send some weapons over to Israel. So Biden said he will be sending an Iron Dome. He will be sending F-35 fighter jets, ammunition, and he will, quote, diplomatically be working with the leader of Iran, which probably means more economic sanctions. But I predict there will be a pretext created and Iran will be blamed, and then we'll be back to square one with war. And by the way, we can thank Obama for the $100 million a day that's going to Israel for its military, and $200 million a day from the United States for their economy, which the Congress passed about 2 months ago.
okay, Liz?
I think another aspect of the military-industrial complex is that in many American communities, the military base is the largest employer in the county. Look at Panama City. When the base was destroyed by Hurricane Michael, the city of Panama City took a huge financial hit. And the folks who come to staff the base they're the F-22 pilots. They make a lot of money and they spend it in those towns. So you're always going to have pushback from local communities who say we can't survive unless we have the military.
Yeah, I agree, Liz. And that's always in chambers of commerce, departments of economic development, all these people say, we got to keep that base. We got to keep the military, all that kind of stuff. I lived in Champaign County, Champaign-Urbana, Illinois in the 80s and early 90s when Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois, which was in our county, closed. And you would have thought we were going to die. You would have thought. And what happened was, yes, some bars closed and some strip joints closed. Rantoul, Illinois is doing all right, and Champaign County, Illinois is doing fine without that military base. And they found other uses for that property. They did keep the golf course open, by the way.
Yeah. The same thing happened in Jacksonville when they closed the one of the Air Force bases, and they repurposed it for private companies. But at the time, the world was going to end because the jobs were going away. And overseas, it's the same way. We were in Germany, a lot of the Germans are employed at the bases. And so when we've been downsizing those bases, that puts a lot of locals out of business.
We could find other work for them to do and spend less money.
I totally agree.
So, Bud, you had a question, comment?
Yes, you make a lot of very good points, Al. We certainly never had a chance of making Afghanistan and Iraq a democracy. The lives and fortune spent were basically wasted. However, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. There have always been nations. It seems like you want to basically eliminate our military or make it dramatically reduced. There have always been nations that have started wars or extorted other nations with their superior force. Should we have let Hitler and Japan take over the world? And if not, what's the alternative?
There's a lot of discussion, or there is, believe it or not, there's discussion about whether that was in fact the case, that Hitler wanted to take over the Americas. But nevertheless, even with that, if you have to say, gee, World War II was justified, we have to go back 75, 80 years to find a war that was justified. We have been the country to start much of the wars that have occurred since World War II. Not the other countries. China hasn't started wars. China's not always good. I'm not trying to imply that. But the United States has been the aggressor throughout much of the post-World War II era.
But isn't it also at least an arguable point that because we had NATO, it was not realistic for other countries to start wars with us, not the major wars like World War II and World War I at least, because it was an unwinnable war to try to attack the West.
Well, lots of folks can argue about the value of NATO. They can certainly also argue that since the fall of the Soviet Union, when, when was it? 89, we'd be losing my dates here. We promised Russia that we wouldn't expand NATO. And instead, we've taken NATO right up to Russia's border. And then we wonder when Russia responds like they're not all happy with us, we wonder why, when we've got missiles and weaponry right on their border. NATO now needs to retract and reduce its footprint.
Yeah. Jay, you had a comment? Question?
Yeah, thanks, Al. you brought up the Vietnam War, and when we look at the history of the Vietnam War, we can see that there were mistakes that were made, and they were made both on the part of the politicians, the presidents, and the generals that were directing the war. There was a lot of blame to spread around, and you quote General Milley that the Afghanistan war was a strategic failure. So who do you think is responsible for that, Al? Do you think that the blame, your presentation seemed to lean towards blaming the generals more than the presidents, and there have been presidents from both parties and other politicians that have been involved in this. So who do you think will share most of the blame for Afghanistan? If it had turned out better, I think we would all feel better about that war. If there had been success in terms of really helping the country. But here we sit, and we're talking about a failure and a strategic failure. So who do you think the responsibility will mostly fall upon?
Well, I hope it will fall upon the former commander-in-chief, but it generally doesn't. Now we look at President Bush as an elder statesman.
President Biden. Bush. I'm sorry. Go
Bush
ahead.
back then.
Yes.
And it's this, we seem to be our first, it's the old phrase that when your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we seem to, let's use the military. The military seems to be the first option for us. When there's problems, we send troops, we send a military force, we do exercises in those countries. How about instead taking a different approach and saying, let's try something else? This hasn't worked, folks, for 60, 70, 80 years now. Let's try something else. So, but I guess I hope the commanders in chief, I hope the politicians are responsible. They're the ones who approve the authorization to use military force. The Congress can consistently votes more military spending. So I hope they will be held accountable, but candidly, I have my doubts.
I think a great book that we should all Americans should read by Amy Goodman, who's heads a Democracy Now! I don't know if you've heard of that program on PBS, is called Static. And it's about George Bush and Rumsfeld and Cheney going into lying, all their lies. Everything is documented with a footnote that she says about the lies going into Iraq and Afghanistan, and working with Tony Blair. Remember, Tony Blair said that Iraq was getting its yellow cake from Niger? It all turned out to be a lie. Everything was a lie with those people, and they turned the military, the whole thing, over to corporations. If you want to read a good book about that, read Blackwater, Brown and Root, Halliburton. All these corporations made a killing, led by Eric Prince and the DeVos woman from Amway. You've heard of her. They all made a killing. They started the all-volunteer army and the mercenary army, which they make $600 to $1,000 a day out of. We have to pay for that, and they are hired out by other countries like Chile and so on. We are being screwed royally. Everybody, I hope you can read this, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army by Jeremy Shahill. He writes for Nation magazine. I don't know if you've heard of that magazine or not, but my eyes are just, I'm not really shocked because I never did trust George Bush Jr. I spent 5 years in the Persian Gulf, my husband and I, when the Iraq-Iran war was going on. We all knew who that war was for. We were supplying weapons to Iran via the American terrorist group, the Contras, and the other side, we were Iraq. As you know, we were supplying weapons there, and we all knew what was going on there. And that's when the United States shot down a commercial Iranian airplane, killing everybody on board. It was, but you don't hear much about that.
Well,
yet
there's so many, you know, so many civilians that have been died in all these wars. I had a question for Larry Senior Gilbert, because I know you were in a pup tent. You were in a pup tent in Arizona, right?
No, in Nevada. Last,
Nevada, okay.
I spent the week with Veterans for Peace. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace with Al Mytty. We're co-coordinators here in the villages. And it was, and with Code Pink and other groups, to shut down Creech Air Force Base. So we had actions there, and it was nonviolent actions to block the entrance to the base, and it backed up traffic of people going in. They go in to work during the day, fire their drones remotely from where they're at, and people die, and then they go home for supper. And this goes on and on, not only at Creech Air Force Base, but at the other drone bases around the country. And so, you know, I mean, it's going to take more than just doing that. We have to somehow see the whole thing. To me, it all boils down to money, the root of all evil, money. There's profit from war, and people are expendable as long as people are making money. And these defense contractors are making mega bucks, and it just continues and continues. And we see, you know, I was seeing young people going into that base, and I thought to myself, you know, they think they're there, they're serving their country, and they're patriotic and everything, but they are being used. And I'm a Vietnam veteran, and look at the lies that kept us there for all these years. And, you know, and we killed 3 million Vietnamese people, 3 million. And, and we were there to keep them from communism. They're doing a hell of a lot better now. And you know, with Ho Chi Minh, he first went to Truman, try to, you know, connect with Truman, and instead Truman supported the French, and so consequently Ho Chi Minh had no alternative. So you know, that war could have been prevented.
Yeah, it was very impersonal when you have drones. I mean, just I guess I got the.
We're going to continue using the drones. You know, we're going to continue using the drones in Afghanistan, and we're going to kill people. We're going to kill innocent people, men, women, children, as we saw here with that family. That guy was working for a company in Pasadena, California.
Yep. We
killed him. And we lied. Then we lied on top of it. We said that he was an ISIS fellow.
Right.
We have killed
until the truth came out, and they couldn't lie anymore.
We've killed apparently 48,000 people using drones. 22,000 of them were civilians. And Daniel Hale is the whistleblower on this, and he says 90% of the people that we kill with drones are not the intended target. And what do we do with that then? You've got in these countries where people hear the noise of the drone flying over, they're living in terror. That somebody blows up the house next door, or the car next door, they hate us. They hate us. Why would we ever think we're going to win hearts and minds and become respected in the world when we're assassinating people throughout the world?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean, it was well portrayed in that movie, Eye in the Sky. I don't know if you saw that. Anyway,
My friend in England, I used to live in England, and I like to get the background of their feelings of what the Americans are doing because our press is so biased. She said that speech by Biden at the United Nations about we're not at war and all the humanitarian ideas he had were just a joke, and they all are laughing. That's not true at all. We are not respected in the world anymore at all for foreign policy.
mhm. Larry, did you have a question? Berman?
Yeah, okay,
I'm sorry.
I'm talking to Larry Berman.
yeah. I think we all agree that, whatever Al presented here was, we all, I think everybody here agrees that, with Al about how bad war is. My question is, what are we going to do about it? What are we really going to do about this atrocious policy that we have had for years and years and years to create wars, make money, and dupe the citizenry of the United States to support every war that comes along, and as long as there's profits involved and so forth, we'll keep on going on and on. What are we going to do to stop it? That's my question. I mean, we all know, we can all talk about all the bad things. Barb can, talk about all her bad things with this and that. But what are we going to do? I want an answer.
Al, do you have an answer?
Well, I know something that we can do. We can educate people. We can support people in Congress like Barbara Lee, who opposed the invasion of Iraq, who opposed the initial invasion in Afghanistan, who is continually calling for significant reductions in military spending. We can support her allies in Congress. They are few in number, but there are some, the Squad and Mark Pocan and some of the others that are.
One person.
I know. We're up against all kinds of things. And if we don't do anything, then I think we have to question what is our future.
The PAC groups, there are tremendous PAC groups infiltrating Congress. Over 1,000 a week are infiltrating and promising them campaign donations if they will go along with their agenda.
Not only that, but then they give them the written legislation and say, this is what we'd like you to pass.
Yes.
We also.
It's all done for them. So,
we also
have the best government money can buy.
Right.
We also know that public polls, and I know this sounds weak, that the American public continually opposes these things, wants troops to come home, wants reductions in military spending, wants the money spent on human beings and on domestic kinds of priorities that we need to do. That's what the public says. That we've got to convince the public to join, and we've got to convince others to become more active in this.
Then the public votes for, votes for people that are,
They
that
do.
are, they get they get a lot of money from these lobbyists, and, that's how they, it really has to do with money and politics, really.
Al,
And-
George Bush Jr. thought of this before he went into war, and therefore he said, we're not going to have a draft. His father told him not to have a draft. If you do, you're going to have another Vietnam on your hands. And it worked. If we had a draft and the body bags start coming home, I think there would be more action taken against all the wars we're fighting.
Well,
Yeah.
Barb,
Can you raise your
Barb,
hand in terms of using it so that we can have everybody talk? Thanks.
Jay, call Jay on. Jay.
Jay?
Yeah, Al, isn't what the public wants is really a well-conducted campaign that makes sense. And, Bud had talked about, when is a war justified? And I think we can look back to something like perhaps Desert Storm in 1990, in which Saddam invaded Kuwait. He was trying to stage a takeover in the Middle East. He was trying to exert Iraq's power in the Middle East. And the United States looked at that and said, we're not going to let that stay. We're not going to let that continue. And so the first Bush authorized a campaign. And it was a short campaign. It pushed Saddam back into Iraq, and we left. And that was looked at as a well-conducted campaign. Isn't that what we want? We don't want, it's probably unrealistic to expect that there aren't going to be wars, there aren't going to be distrust between nations, but when they're conducted in a way that makes sense, can't we live with that?
Yeah.
no.
Excuse me, Jay.
And I'd argue in the book, War is a Lie, the author, David Swanson, takes a look at that specific war and looks at that and says, geez, there are all these other things that caused it. He's not trying to justify Saddam Hussein's irrational, horrible behavior, but he's saying Kuwait was also a provocateur. Is that the right word?
Yes.
And this thing,
Okay.
Kuwait wasn't innocent completely in that. And would there have been other ways? Would there have been other ways than killing, slaughtering human beings and destroying the environment than that? And the answer is yes. There are always alternatives to war.
I'd like to make a comment here. I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, go ahead.
War is, and this is the whole substance of Al's presentation. War is not justified, period.
Yeah. Yeah, Bud, did you have a comment?
Yeah, somebody mentioned that going back to the draft. I know that politically that wouldn't be very popular these days, and I'm pretty sure Al wouldn't want to have the draft either. But some kind of required universal service, which would include the draft, as long as we're going to have a military, I think it really makes a lot of sense for, if we're going to ever have a war, for it to be shared by everyone and not just have 1% of the population be at risk. If the children of the congressmen that have to agree with it and fund it, and all of the people in the administration, if their families were at risk too, decisions might be different. And the way that our people were having to go back 5-6 times to the Middle East was just horrible. There was a lot of political decisions that I think might have been different if we had a draft still.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But I'll agree with you if there was some kind of universal service, perhaps. But then make it easy for people to say, I'm not going to participate in the military. Make it easy for them to be conscientious objectors and make the benefits the same, the educational benefits, the health benefits, retirement, all of those kinds of things. If folks say, I'm going to be a teacher instead, I'm going to the Peace Corps, I'm going to Vista, I'm going to work in a hospital, I'm going to do whatever, that they get the same thing as people who sign up for war.
I agree completely.
Then maybe.
Yeah, don't you think that the
But
draft-
Congress isn't interested in doing that, by the way. What instead they just did, they included, to make war more equal, they said that 18-year-old women now have to register for the draft. A draft, that registration for draft apparently costs the US taxpayers something, now this is chicken feed compared to trillions of dollars, but it's something like $27 million we spend to maintain that draft registration, when it's pure utter waste, when we have other ways of contacting people. The government knows that they've got a social security number on everybody. They know how to find us.
Don't you think that the draft was the reason, one of the main reasons that the Vietnam War, that there was so much protest against the Vietnam War?
No, I think it was Creedence Clearwater Revival when they said, I ain't no fortunate son. It ain't me. It ain't me. Yes, the draft was horrible back then. It's still horrible. And so is war. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I think, any other comments? Al, you did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Al.
All right.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming here, and I just want to let you know that next month we're gonna have the League of Women Voters. I don't know if Jeannie's on still, but we're gonna have the League One voters talk about the new voting laws that were just signed into law by Governor DeSantis, and you know that.
And Governor DeSantis.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah, him too.
yeah.
Tell him
Anyway.
what date is it?
November 1st, I think.
No, is it the first?
Is this being recorded?
Yes.
So when can we have access to it?
Oh, I'll get it to you probably by tomorrow.
Okay, because I'd like to share it with a number of people, including the people that I was with last week.
Okay, yeah, no.
And
No
by the
problem.
way, if anybody actually wanted the slides or something to use or whatever, I don't have any great copyright or pride of authorship, and so you're welcome to use the slides or portions of it as well. So
That would be great. Okay, well, I really appreciate everybody's comments, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you, Sue.
Bye.
thank you, Sue. Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
you, Al.
Thank everybody.
Bye.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take it easy, Sue, Joe.